Hi, my name is Jordan, and today I'll be presenting Chapter 5, Whatever Happened to Behavior Anyway. This chapter had 3 sections, and I chose to focus on the section on memory and learning. So how well is conditioning remembered? A conditioned stimulus that undergoes conditioning at one point can evoke a conditioned response in the future. And this is shown in Robert Henderson's experiment with rats, in which he concluded that conditioning can be retained well over time. Some conditioning, however, is not remembered. Some forms of information are forgotten more quickly than others, and this was demonstrated with fear inhibition forgotten faster than fear excitation. There's also a figure in the chapter that kind of goes over that. But reminders can be used to reduce the amount that's forgotten, and this can help to improve memory performance. Additionally, an important term in this section was memory reactivation, which is forgotten memories can be triggered by re-exposure to a part of the original learning situation. There are 3 classic reasons for forgetting. The first one is trace decay, meaning that memory trace may fade away or decay over time. It is debated how long memory traces last, and memory can be forgotten without becoming decayed or destroyed. The second cause of forgetting is interference, in which memory for information learned at one point in time can be hurt when conflicting information is learned at some other point in time. So this interferes with access to the target information, and there are 2 types of interference: proactive interference and retroactive interference. And then the third reason for forgetting is retrieval failure, and that is when information may remain available in the memory, but it is forgotten if you cannot retrieve it. So that information is still there, but there's some reason why the person is unable to go back and retrieve that information. And so the conditions present during memory testing need to be as similar as possible to those that were present during learning. And I think we kind of all have had this experience where maybe you're like taking an exam, and you know that you know the answer to a question, but you can't come up with like the exact wording, or you can almost kind of sit there and remember where you were when you were studying, or maybe you remember like the page in which the information was on. And so if you can kind of bring yourself back to wherever you were when you first learned that information, you might have an easier time retrieving it. And so the passage of time leads to forgetting for many reasons. So the next section was remembering, forgetting, and extinction. And this section discussed how extinction does not destroy the original learning. And this happens with spontaneous recovery and the renewal effect. And even though responding to a conditioned stimulus is suppressed in the extinction context, the context does not work through simple inhibitory conditioning. However, researchers and psychologists are unsure why. So responding to an extinguished conditioned stimulus can also depend on the context in which it occurs. And during conditioning, the conditioned stimulus is associated with the unconditioned stimulus. So the conditioned stimulus evokes a response because it activates the unconditioned stimulus node or representation. Also, during extinction, the conditioned stimulus acquires a second inhibitory association with the unconditioned stimulus. So when the conditioned stimulus is presented in the extinction context, the inhibitory link will be activated. And at this point, the animal will not respond to the conditioned stimulus. And when the conditioned stimulus is presented outside of the extinction context, the inhibitory link will not be activated and renewed. So the renewed responding will occur, and this is also known as the renewal effect. The excitatory association does not require a context for activation, and conditioning is less hurt by changing the context than extinction performance is. And so context is provided by many types of background cues, and a context change may be created by the passage of time. So another important term to know is spontaneous recovery, and that is the recovery of responding that occurs when time elapses after extinction. So the renewal effect happens when the conditioned stimulus is tested outside of the extinction's temporal context, and spontaneous recovery and renewal occur because the animal fails to retrieve inhibition outside the extinction context. So the renewal effect and spontaneous recovery may both provide reasons for relapse after exposure therapy. Also, fear in humans can be reduced by exposure to the feared stimulus, but the fear may be renewed in a different context. And so this is when the renewal effect was reduced if the participants were given a cue that reminded them of the extinction. I mean, you can read more about that trial and experiment in the textbook. So the renewal effect is clinically relevant and may be obtained under a range of circumstances. So another term, reinstatement, is when the unconditioned stimulus is presented on its own after extinction, and it can cause responding to the conditioned stimulus to return when it is tested later. And rapid reacquisition is the conditioned response can sometimes return very quickly when the conditioned stimulus and unconditioned stimulus pairings are repeated after extinction. So other examples of context and interference. So this was the next section, and it discussed how a conditioned stimulus may acquire more than one association. And important in this section is counter-conditioning, which is a theoretical idea behind the systematic desensitization, I can't pronounce that word, of simple phobias. And spontaneous recovery and renewal effects occur after counter-conditioning. Additionally, important in this section was latent inhibition, which is reduced when the context is changed after pre-exposure to the conditioned stimulus. In latent inhibition, habituation is usually unaffected, and latent inhibition is also forgotten over time. So I found this next section to be particularly interesting. It discussed the question of, can memories be erased? And after reading this section, yes, memories can be erased under specific conditions. So newly learned memories are unstable, and they're easy to disrupt for a few hours before the brain stores them in a stable form. So this is like before memories go to long-term memory. They are definitely more prone to being erased when they are still in the short-term memory. So memories must be consolidated, requiring synthesis of new proteins in the brain. And a consolidated memory can be briefly unstable again when it's reactivated or retrieved. So reconsolidation is the process of returning a reactivated memory to its stable form. And a memory might be quote unquote erased if it's reactivated but not allowed to return to the stable form. One common time when this can occur is when someone is taking drugs, whether they be prescribed or illegal drugs, and this can disrupt the process. So research on reconsolidation has many implications for understanding memory, and human memories can be quite inaccurate with repeated remembering over time. A very common time when this occurs is if you have a witness to a crime, and over time they are asked to repeat what they saw, time and time again to different detectives and police officers, maybe different organizations. And then so by the time they take the witness stand at trial, oftentimes when they recount what they saw, they could actually kind of tell a different story than what they originally said. And it's not on purpose. They're not trying to skew the story or what they saw, but it's just how their memory has changed of that event. And so the interim summary is just kind of like important. It kind of sums up this whole section. Is classical conditioning has long-lasting effects on behavior, and forgetting is often due to interference or retrieval failure. So that is the end of the first section, memory and learning. Please make sure you go and look at the other two sections in this chapter, and good luck on your quiz.